when a dying baby's labored breathing is the only sound cutting through a Montana blizzard in 1867. A desperate mother's lullaby becomes her final prayer until a Comanche warrior emerges from the storm with ancient healing knowledge that could save the child's life. But when soldiers arrive hunting this same man who holds her daughter's fate in his hands, will Catherine choose her family's safety or protect the stranger who answered her most desperate hour? The baby's cough sounded like breaking glass in the frozen cabin. Catherine Hayes held her 3-week-old daughter Emma against her chest, feeling how light the tiny body had become after days without proper feeding. The Montana Territory winter of 1867 had trapped them in their one-room home for nearly a week, and now the worst blizzard in memory howled outside their thin wooden walls. Emma's skin felt cold as river stones. Her little lips had turned the pale blue of winter sky, and each breath came slower than the last. Catherine pressed her ear to the baby's chest, listening to the weak flutter of a heart that seemed ready to give up its fight against the bitter cold that had crept into their bones despite the dying fire. "James," Catherine whispered to her husband, who lay shivering under their only thick blanket. His face burned with fever while his body shook with chills. He had collapsed 2 days ago while trying to chop more firewood, and since then he had barely been able to open his eyes. "James, I think Emma is dying." Her husband's eyes fluttered open, but they looked glassy and far away. He tried to speak, but only a weak moan escaped his cracked lips. Catherine realized with growing terror that she was truly alone in this fight to keep her family alive. The wind outside screamed like angry spirits, rattling the wooden shutters and sending snow through every crack in the walls. Their small pile of firewood had dwindled to almost nothing. The last of their dried meat hung frozen solid from the ceiling beam, too hard to chew even if Catherine had felt hungry. But hunger seemed like a small problem compared to watching her baby slip away breath by breath. Catherine began to hum the lullaby her own mother had sung to her years ago back in Ohio. The melody felt warm in her throat, even as the words caught on her tears. "Hush now, my darling. Don't you cry. Mama's here to sing you bye." She rocked Emma gently, trying to warm the baby with her own body heat. But Catherine could feel how cold she had become too. The cabin felt smaller with each passing hour, as if the walls were slowly closing in around them. Ice had formed on the inside of the windows, blocking out what little daylight managed to fight through the storm clouds. The only light came from the few remaining embers in their stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows that looked like reaching fingers across the rough wooden walls. Catherine looked around their home, remembering how proud James had been when he finished building it last spring. They had painted the walls white and hung cheerful yellow curtains at the windows. Catherine had planted wildflowers in a small garden outside the front door. Now everything looked gray and lifeless, covered in frost and shadow. Emma made a small sound, barely more than a sigh, and Catherine felt her heart clench with fear. The baby's breathing had become so shallow that Catherine had to watch carefully to see if her tiny chest was still moving. She unwrapped the blankets to check Emma's hands and feet, gasping when she saw how purple the little fingers had become. "Please don't leave me," Catherine whispered, pressing her lips to Emma's forehead. The baby's skin felt like touching snow. Catherine wrapped her daughter more tightly in the wool blanket she had knitted during the long autumn months when she was still round with pregnancy and full of hope for the spring. The storm outside grew louder, as if nature itself was angry at the world. Catherine could hear tree branches breaking under the weight of ice and snow. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, its voice mixing with the wind to create a sound that made Catherine's blood run cold. She thought about all the stories she had heard about families found frozen in their homes after harsh winters, and wondered if anyone would ever find them if the storm didn't end soon. She tried to remember the prayers her grandmother had taught her, but the words seemed to scatter like leaves in the wind. Instead, she kept humming, letting the simple melody be her prayer. The song seemed to be the only thing keeping Emma tethered to life, as if the music itself was a thin rope preventing her daughter from drifting away into the dark. Catherine's own hands had grown numb with cold, but she forced herself to keep rubbing Emma's tiny arms and legs, trying to bring warmth back into the baby's body. She talked to Emma about the spring that would come, about the flowers they would plant together, about the songs they would sing when the baby was old enough to laugh and clap her hands. But even as she spoke these hopeful words, Catherine felt despair creeping into her heart like ice water. Emma's breathing grew more labored with each passing minute. The baby's eyes had closed hours ago and had not opened since. Catherine began to accept the terrible truth that she might lose her daughter before dawn broke over the frozen Montana mountains. The wind suddenly changed direction, hitting the cabin from a new angle and making the whole building shudder. Catherine heard something crash outside, probably their wooden fence or maybe part of the roof over the animal shelter. She hoped their horse was still alive in the small barn, though she hadn't been able to check on the animal for days. As Catherine continued her lonely vigil, holding her dying baby close to her heart, she noticed something strange. The wind seemed to be growing quieter, as if the storm was finally beginning to lose its strength. But with that small hope came a new fear. What if help was too late? What if Emma couldn't hold on long enough for rescue to arrive? The last ember in the fireplace flickered and went dark, plunging the cabin into complete blackness. Catherine sat in the cold darkness, humming her lullaby to a baby who might not live to see another sunrise, when she heard something that made her breath catch in her throat. Footsteps. Someone was walking toward their cabin through the snow. The footsteps crunched closer through the deep snow, each step deliberate and sure despite the howling wind that still whipped around the cabin. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she strained to listen. The steps didn't sound like James's familiar heavy boots, and they moved with a strange rhythm she had never heard before. Emma stirred weakly in her arms, making a sound so faint Catherine almost missed it. The baby's breathing had become even more shallow, and Catherine could feel how cold Emma's little body had grown. Fear mixed with desperate hope in Catherine's chest as the footsteps stopped just outside their front door. "James," Catherine whispered urgently, shaking her husband's shoulder. "James, someone is here." But her husband only moaned softly, lost in his fever dreams. Catherine realized she would have to face whoever stood outside their door completely alone, with no way to protect herself or her dying baby. A knock came at the door, not the frantic pounding she might expect from a lost traveler, but 3 firm, measured taps that somehow carried authority. Catherine's mouth went dry as dust. Stories flooded her mind of all the dangers that roamed the Montana wilderness in winter. Outlaws hiding from the law, wild animals driven desperate by hunger, or worse things that decent people only whispered about in hushed voices. "Who's there?" Catherine called out, proud that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Emma's breathing seemed to catch for a moment, as if even the baby sensed the tension in the air. A man's voice answered from the other side of the door, speaking words in a language Catherine had never heard before. The sounds were musical but completely foreign, rising and falling like wind through pine trees. Then the voice switched to English, though the accent was thick and unfamiliar. "Woman with sick child," the voice said carefully. "I come to help." Catherine's blood turned to ice water. How could a stranger know about Emma's condition? Had he been watching their cabin? Was this some kind of trap? She clutched Emma closer to her chest, her mind racing through possibilities. None of them good. "Go away," Catherine shouted, though her voice shook with fear. "My husband has a rifle." The lie came easily, born from desperation and the need to protect her baby. In truth, James's rifle hung uselessly on the wall across the room, and Catherine had never learned to load or fire it properly. The man outside was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine began to hope he might leave them alone. Then he spoke again, and his words made her heart skip a beat. "Your baby has the cold sickness," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "She breathes like bird with broken wing. Without medicine, she will not see morning sun." Catherine gasped, because his words described exactly what she had been witnessing all night. Emma's breathing did sound like a wounded bird, weak and fluttering. How could he know such details, unless he had somehow seen into their cabin? Fear and hope warred in Catherine's chest as she tried to decide what to do. "How do you know about my baby?" Catherine demanded, moving closer to the door but keeping Emma wrapped tightly in her arms. "I hear her cough when wind grows quiet," the man replied. "I know this sickness. I have medicine that can help, if you let me inside." Catherine's mind spun with confusion and terror. Everything about this situation felt wrong and dangerous. Decent people didn't wander through blizzards in the middle of the night. They didn't appear at isolated cabins with mysterious knowledge and offers of help. Yet Emma was dying in her arms, and this stranger claimed he could save her. "What kind of medicine?" Catherine asked, stalling for time while she tried to think clearly. "Herbs from mountain plants," the man answered. "Old knowledge passed down from grandmother to granddaughter for many generations. Your white doctor medicine cannot help with cold sickness, but my people know how to call warmth back into small bodies." His words sent chills down Catherine's spine. His people? What did that mean? Her imagination filled with stories she had heard about the various tribes that still roamed the Montana mountains, some peaceful, others hostile to white settlers. She had never actually encountered any native people herself, but the stories told around trading posts and army forts were enough to fill her with dread. Yet Emma grew weaker with each passing minute. Catherine could feel her daughter's life slipping away like sand through her fingers. The baby's skin had taken on a waxy appearance that Catherine recognized from helping her grandmother tend to dying relatives back in Ohio. Without help, Emma would not survive until dawn. "Are you?" Catherine started to ask, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the question without giving offense that might anger the stranger. "I am Comanche," the man said, as if reading her thoughts. "But I am also healer. I do not make war on babies." Catherine's knees nearly buckled at this confirmation of her fears. The Comanche had a reputation as fierce warriors who showed no mercy to white settlers. Stories of raids and kidnappings had reached even their remote corner of Montana. Yet this man spoke of healing rather than violence, and his voice carried a gentleness that seemed at odds with his fearsome reputation. Emma made another tiny sound, so weak Catherine had to press her ear to the baby's lips to hear it. Emma's breathing was becoming more and more labored, and Catherine realized she was running out of time to make a decision that would determine whether her daughter lived or died. The wind howled around the cabin again, rattling the windows and sending snow through the cracks in the walls. Catherine shivered, partly from cold and partly from the weight of the choice before her. She could keep the door locked and trust in prayer alone to save Emma, or she could open their home to a stranger whose intentions she could not guess. "If I let you in," Catherine said slowly, "how do I know you won't hurt us?" The man was quiet for several heartbeats before answering. "I lost my own daughter to winter sickness 2 years past," he said, and Catherine heard genuine pain in his voice. "She was born early, like yours, too small to fight the cold that got into her lungs. I could not save her." Something in the way he spoke those words touched Catherine's heart despite her fear. She heard the echo of her own grief in his voice, the sound of a parent facing the unbearable loss of a child. Whatever else this stranger might be, in this moment he was simply another parent who understood the desperate love that would make someone do anything to save their baby. Emma's breathing grew even more shallow, and Catherine felt panic rising in her throat. Dawn was still hours away, and she could not bear the thought of watching her daughter slowly slip away while help stood just outside their door, regardless of who that help might be. The wooden door swung open with a groan that sounded like the cabin itself was crying out in fear. Snow and freezing air rushed inside, making Catherine gasp as the cold hit her face like a slap. Through the swirling white darkness stepped a figure that seemed too large for their small doorway, a man wrapped in thick buffalo hide that made him look like some creature from the wild mountains themselves. Catherine's first instinct was to run, but her legs felt frozen to the floor as she stared at the stranger who had emerged from the deadly blizzard. He was taller than James, with broad shoulders that spoke of a life spent outdoors in harsh conditions. Long black hair hung loose around his face, partially covered by a fur-lined hood that cast shadows over his features. But what struck Catherine most were his eyes, dark and intense, yet somehow gentle as they immediately focused on the bundle in her arms. "Close door quickly," he said in his careful English, already moving to help her shut out the storm. Cold air makes sickness worse for little ones. His movements were smooth and confident, like a man who belonged in this frozen wilderness in ways Catherine never could. As he pushed the door closed against the wind, Catherine noticed his hands, large and weathered, but surprisingly gentle in how they handled even the simple task of working the door latch. The stranger, who had called himself Comanche, stood dripping melted snow onto their wooden floor, but his attention never wavered from Emma. "May I see child?" he asked, extending his hands toward Catherine. Everything inside her screamed warnings about trusting this man, yet Emma's breathing had grown so weak that Catherine could barely feel it against her chest. "Don't hurt her," Catherine whispered, her voice breaking as she slowly, carefully placed Emma into the stranger's large hands. She watched in amazement as this fierce-looking warrior cradled her tiny daughter with the same delicate care she might use to hold a butterfly. His weathered fingers gently pulled back the blanket from Emma's face, and Catherine saw his expression grow serious as he studied the baby's pale skin and blue-tinged lips. "Cold sickness has deep hold," he murmured, speaking partly to Catherine and partly to himself, "but heart still beats strong. She fights hard, this little warrior." He lifted Emma closer to his face, listening to her breathing with an intensity that reminded Catherine of her grandmother examining sick chickens back on their Ohio farm. "There is still time if we work quickly." The man set down a leather bag Catherine hadn't noticed him carrying. It was old and worn smooth from years of use, decorated with beadwork and patterns that seemed to tell stories she couldn't understand. As he opened it, Catherine caught glimpses of small pouches, dried plants, and tools she had never seen before. The bag gave off a strange but not unpleasant smell, earthy and green, like walking through a forest after rain. "What is your name?" Catherine asked suddenly, realizing she was trusting her daughter's life to someone whose name she didn't even know. "I am called Ayana," he replied without looking up from his preparations. "It means eternal blossom in my people's tongue. My grandmother chose this name because I was born during hardest winter she could remember. Yet I lived when others did not." He glanced up at Catherine briefly. "Sometimes strength comes from unexpected places." Catherine found herself studying Ayana's face as he worked. His skin was weathered like leather from years under the sun and wind, marked with small scars that spoke of a dangerous life. But his hands moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent years learning to heal rather than harm. She watched him select different plants from his pouches, sniffing each one before setting it aside or adding it to a growing pile on their small wooden table. "How did you learn to be a healer?" Catherine asked, partly from curiosity and partly to keep herself from panicking as she watched a stranger handle her dying baby. "My grandmother was medicine woman for our band," Ayana replied, grinding something between two smooth stones. "She taught me that healing is not about fighting sickness. Is about calling life back into body that wants to give up. Plants know how to do this. Animals know. We just forget because we think too much with our minds instead of listening with our hearts." James stirred on the bed behind them, mumbling something in his fever sleep. Catherine glanced back at her husband, torn between staying close to Emma and checking on James. Ayana noticed her divided attention and spoke softly, without stopping his work. "Your man has different sickness," he said. "Body fever, but not dangerous like cold. Sickness in babies. He will wake when fever breaks, probably by morning. But small one." He held up a pinch of what looked like dried moss. "She needs medicine now, before spirit decides to leave body behind." Catherine's heart clenched at his words. She had been trying not to think about that possibility, that Emma might simply slip away despite everything they could do. Watching Ayana work with such calm confidence gave her the first real hope she had felt in days, but it also made the danger feel more real. If someone with his obvious skill was working so hard to save Emma, then her daughter must be closer to death than Catherine had wanted to admit. "Tell me about your grandmother," Catherine said, desperate to keep talking so she wouldn't have to listen to Emma's increasingly shallow breathing. "What was she like?" A small smile crossed Ayana's face as he continued his preparations. "Grandmother was smaller than you, but could make grown warriors shake in fear when she was angry. She said healing was women's work because women understand about bringing life into world." He paused in his grinding to look directly at Catherine. "She would have liked you, I think. You have strong spirit to open door to stranger in storm to save your child." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at his words. She had not felt strong at all tonight, only terrified and desperate. But maybe those feelings were not signs of weakness. Maybe they were exactly what any mother would feel when facing the possible loss of her child. Ayanna finished grinding his mixture and reached for a small clay pot from his bag. "Now we make tea that will warm her blood from inside," he explained. "But first, you must help me build fire. Medicine works better when body is warm on outside too." Catherine nodded eagerly, grateful to have something useful to do. Together they gathered the last pieces of their firewood and the few remaining embers from the fireplace. Ayanna showed her how to arrange the wood in a pattern that would catch fire quickly and burn hot. As flames began to lick at the dry wood, Catherine felt the first real warmth she had experienced in days. "Good," Ayanna said, settling cross-legged beside the fire with Emma still cradled in one arm while he worked with his free hand. "Now we wait for water to heat, and then we see if little warrior is ready to fight her way back to world of living." Catherine knelt beside him, close enough to touch Emma but far enough away to give Ayanna room to work. For the first time since the blizzard began, she felt like Emma might actually survive the night. But as she watched this mysterious healer prepare medicine for her daughter, Catherine realized she still knew almost nothing about who Ayanna really was or why he had risked his own life to venture through a deadly storm to help complete strangers. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls as snow continued to fall outside their small refuge. Emma's future hung in the balance, dependent on ancient knowledge Catherine didn't understand, and a man whose motives remained as mysterious as the storm that had brought him to their door. Steam began rising from the small clay pot as Ayanna held it carefully over the growing flames, his dark eyes never leaving Emma's pale face. Catherine watched in fascination as he swirled the mixture inside the pot, muttering words in his own language that sounded like prayers or maybe spells. The liquid inside had turned a deep green color that reminded Catherine of spring leaves, and it gave off a sharp, medicinal smell that made her nose tingle. "This part is most dangerous," Ayanna said quietly, his voice serious in a way that made Catherine's stomach clench with new fear. "Medicine is strong enough to call life back, but also strong enough to harm if given wrong way. You must hold her very still while I give small drops. Even tiny movement could make liquid go into lungs instead of stomach." Catherine's hands trembled as she reached for Emma, terrified that she might make a mistake that would hurt her daughter instead of helping her. Ayanna noticed her shaking and placed one of his large, steady hands over both of hers for a moment. "Breathe deep," he instructed. "Fear makes hands shake, but love makes them steady. Think only of wanting her to live." His touch was warm and somehow calming, and Catherine found her breathing slowing as she focused on his words. When he lifted his hand away, her own hands felt more steady and sure. Together they positioned Emma so her tiny head was tilted slightly back, supported by Catherine's palm. The baby looked impossibly small and fragile in the firelight, her skin still that frightening blue-white color that spoke of how close death had come. Catherine could barely feel Emma's breathing now, just the faintest flutter of movement in the tiny chest. Ayanna dipped what looked like a small wooden spoon into the green medicine, bringing up just a few drops that clung to the carved surface. "Open her mouth very gently," he instructed. "Just barely, like you are giving kiss to sleeping bird." Catherine used her pinky finger to carefully part Emma's lips, revealing the baby's tiny pink tongue and the dark space beyond. Her heart hammered as Ayanna moved the spoon closer, his hand rock steady despite the gravity of the moment. One drop of the green liquid fell onto Emma's tongue, then another, then a third. For a moment nothing happened. Emma lay motionless in Catherine's arms, and Catherine held her breath, waiting for some sign that the medicine was working. Then suddenly Emma's throat moved in a tiny swallowing motion, and Catherine felt a sob of relief escape her lips. "Good," Ayanna murmured, setting the pot aside, but keeping it close to the fire. "She takes medicine. Now we wait and watch." He settled back on his heels, his eyes fixed on Emma with the intensity of a hunter watching for prey. Sometimes change comes quickly. Sometimes, body takes time to decide if it wants to fight. Catherine found herself studying Ayana's face in the firelight, noticing details she had missed in her earlier panic. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind, and a thin scar that ran from his left ear down to his jaw. His hair was longer than any white man would wear, decorated with small beads and what looked like carved bone. Everything about him spoke of a life lived far from the towns and settlements Catherine knew. "Why do you help us?" Catherine asked suddenly. "Your people and mine. We're not exactly friends." She immediately worried that her words might offend him, but Ayana just nodded thoughtfully. "This is true," he admitted. "Much bad blood between Comanche and white settlers, much fear on both sides." He was quiet for a moment, gazing into the fire. "But babies do not know about such things. When child is sick, mother's heart feels same pain whether skin is red or white or black. Grandmother taught me that medicine belongs to all people, not just to one tribe." Emma stirred slightly in Catherine's arms, making a sound that was barely more than a whisper. Both Catherine and Ayana leaned closer, watching for any sign of improvement. Emma's eyelids fluttered but didn't open, and her breathing remained shallow and quick. "Tell me about your daughter," Catherine said softly, remembering what Ayana had mentioned through the door. "The one you lost." Pain flickered across Ayana's features like a shadow passing over the moon. He was quiet for so long that Catherine began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with old grief. "Her name was Tumani, dewdrops in your language. She was born when snow still covered ground. Too early, too small." His hands moved restlessly as he spoke, as if they still remembered holding his lost child. "I tried everything I knew, every medicine grandmother taught me. But some spirits are too eager to return to spirit world. Sometimes love is not enough to keep them here." Catherine felt tears burning her eyes as she listened to his story. She could hear the echo of her own fears in his words, the terrible helplessness of watching a child suffer and being unable to fix it. "How old was she?" Catherine whispered. 6 weeks when winter spirits took her," Ayana replied. "Same age as your little one now. Every time I see baby that age." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Perhaps this is why spirits led me to your cabin tonight. Perhaps Chumani's spirit wants me to save another child, since I could not save her." The fire crackled between them as Catherine absorbed his words. She tried to imagine the pain of losing Emma and felt her chest tighten with sympathetic grief for this man who had suffered such a loss. No wonder he wandered the mountains alone. What parent could bear to stay in one place after such heartbreak? Emma made another small sound, and this time Catherine was certain she saw a flutter of improvement in the baby's color. The blue tinge around Emma's lips seemed slightly less pronounced, and her breathing appeared to be deepening just a little. "Is she getting better?" Catherine asked urgently, hope and fear warring in her voice. Ayana leaned closer, his practiced eye taking in details Catherine couldn't see. "Medicine begins to work," he said cautiously. "But healing takes time. Body must decide to fight, and fighting is hard work for one so small." He reached into his bag again and pulled out what looked like a small animal skin, soft and supple from years of careful preparation. "What's that for?" Catherine asked, as Ayana began arranging the skin near the fire. "Warmth," he explained. "We make warm place for her to rest, while medicine does its work. Heat from fire goes into skin. Skin gives heat to baby. Like nest that keeps bird eggs warm until they hatch." He positioned the skin carefully, testing its temperature with his hand to make sure it wouldn't be too hot for Emma's delicate skin. Catherine watched as Ayana prepared this makeshift warming bed with the same careful attention he had given to making the medicine. Every movement spoke of experience and knowledge passed down through generations. She found herself wondering about his grandmother, the medicine woman who had taught him these skills. What would such a woman think of him using her teachings to help white settlers? "Your grandmother," Catherine said carefully, "would she approve of you helping us?" Ayana considered the question as he made final adjustments to Emma's warming bed. "Grandmother always said healing is like water. It flows where it is needed most, not where people think it should go. He looked up at Catherine with something that might have been a smile. She would say, "Sick baby is sick baby," no matter what color mother's skin might be. Emma's breathing seemed to be growing steadier, though Catherine might have been imagining it in her desperate hope for improvement. The baby's skin still looked pale, but perhaps not quite as frightening as it had an hour ago. Catherine allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her daughter was going to survive this terrible night. But even as hope began to bloom in Catherine's chest, she heard a new sound that made her blood turn to ice. In the distance, barely audible over the wind, came the sound of horses moving through snow and men's voices calling to each other. Someone was approaching their isolated cabin through the storm, and Catherine had a terrible feeling that whoever it was might not be as friendly as the healer who sat beside her fire, trying to save her daughter's life. Horses snorted and stamped in the snow outside, their heavy breathing visible in white puffs through the cabin's frosted window. Catherine's heart stopped as she heard the jingle of metal, spurs, bridles, and what sounded like weapons being readied. Ayana's head snapped up from where he had been carefully monitoring Emma's breathing, his entire body going rigid as a wolf sensing danger. "Soldiers," he whispered, the single word carrying more weight than a thunderclap. His dark eyes met Catherine's, and she saw something there she hadn't seen before, genuine fear. Not for himself, she realized, but for what his presence in their cabin might mean for her and James and Emma. "They tracked me for 3 days through mountains." Catherine's mind raced as she clutched Emma closer to her chest. The baby's breathing had indeed improved slightly since taking the medicine, but she was still desperately sick and needed continued care. If these soldiers took Ayana away now, Emma might not survive until morning. But if Catherine was caught harboring a Comanche warrior, what would happen to her own family? "Why are they chasing you?" Catherine demanded in a harsh whisper, suddenly terrified that she had invited a murderer or thief into her home. "What did you do?" Ayana's jaw tightened, and for a moment Catherine thought he wouldn't answer. The voices outside grew closer, accompanied by the creaking of leather saddles as men dismounted from their horses. 2 weeks ago, soldiers attacked peaceful camp while men were hunting, he said quickly, his words coming fast and low. "Killed women, children, elders. I fought back, helped some escape. Now they want to bring me back for trial, they already decided." The blood drained from Catherine's face as she absorbed his words. She had heard stories of such attacks, brutal raids on Indian camps that the army claimed were necessary for protecting settlers. But she had never thought about what those raids might look like from the other side, or what kind of man would risk everything to protect innocent people. "Open up in there," a gruff voice shouted from outside, followed by heavy fists pounding on the door. "This is Sergeant Morrison of the Montana Territorial Guard. We're tracking a hostile through these parts." Emma stirred restlessly at the loud noise, her tiny face scrunching up as if she might cry. Catherine rocked her gently, terrified that the baby's cries would give away how fragile her condition still was. Ayana was already moving, gathering his medicine bag and looking toward the back of the cabin where a small window faced the woods. "I go now," he said, reaching for Emma one last time to check her breathing. "Give more medicine in 2 hours, same amount, same way. Keep her warm, keep her still. She will live if you do this." He pressed the clay pot into Catherine's free hand, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment. "Thank you for trusting stranger in storm." "Wait," Catherine said desperately, but Ayana was already moving toward the window with the fluid grace of someone who had spent a lifetime avoiding capture. "What if she gets worse? What if I do something wrong?" "You will not," Ayana said with quiet confidence as he worked the window latch. "You have mother's heart. That is strongest medicine of all." The window opened with barely a whisper of sound, letting in a gust of cold air that made Emma whimper softly. "Open this door right now, or we'll break it down." Sergeant Morrison's voice boomed across the small clearing, followed by the sound of rifle bolts being worked. Catherine realized she had only seconds to make a choice that would determine the fate of everyone in the cabin. James stirred on the bed behind her, his fever-clouded eyes opening as consciousness began to return. "Catherine," he mumbled, trying to sit up. "What's happening?" Who's outside? Catherine's mind worked frantically as she weighed her options. She could tell the soldiers the truth, that a Comanche healer had saved her baby's life and then disappeared into the storm. Or she could lie, protecting Ayanna while risking her own family's safety if the soldiers discovered the deception. The medicine pot felt warm in her hand, still holding the heat from the fire and the hope it represented for Emma's survival. "Catherine, I'm counting to 3, Morrison shouted. 1. Emma's breathing hitched, and Catherine felt the baby's body tense, as if sensing the danger in the air. The improvement from the medicine was real but fragile. Emma still needed careful monitoring and more doses to fully recover. If the soldiers came inside and disrupted everything now, all of Ayanna's work might be for nothing. 2. Catherine made her decision. She moved quickly to the door, checking to make sure Ayanna had vanished completely through the window before she called out, "Just a moment. My husband is sick, and I need to make myself decent." She could hear the soldiers muttering among themselves outside, some of them arguing about whether to wait or just break down the door. Catherine used those precious seconds to smooth her hair, arrange her clothes, and most importantly, to hide the clay pot containing Ayanna's medicine behind the flour barrel where the soldiers wouldn't notice it. James managed to sit up on the bed, though he swayed dangerously and had to grip the wooden frame to keep from falling. "Who are those men?" he asked, his voice still thick with fever but growing stronger. "Why do they want to come inside?" "They're chasing someone," Catherine said quickly, moving to help steady him. "A Comanche warrior who attacked settlers." The lie tasted bitter in her mouth, but she pushed down her guilt. James was still too sick to understand the full situation, and she couldn't risk him accidentally saying something that would give away what had really happened. 3, that's it! Morrison's voice cracked like a whip, followed immediately by the sound of heavy boots charging toward their door. Catherine took a deep breath and lifted the wooden bar that secured their door, knowing that her next words would either save Ayanna's life or doom her own family. Emma lay quiet in her arms, breathing more easily than she had in days, living proof of the healing power that had emerged from the storm like an answer to prayer. The door burst open before Catherine could reach for the handle, sending a blast of snow and frigid air across the cabin floor. Sergeant Morrison stepped inside first, a big man with a gray beard and cold blue eyes that immediately began scanning every corner of their small home. 2 more soldiers followed him, their rifles ready and their faces grim with the seriousness of their hunt. "Ma'am?" Morrison said curtly, touching his hat brim in a gesture that was more habit than politeness. "Sorry to disturb you folks, but we're tracking a dangerous Comanche brave through these mountains. Fresh tracks lead right to your door." Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to meet the sergeant's suspicious gaze steadily. Emma's future depended on her ability to convince these men that nothing unusual had happened in their cabin tonight. The warm weight of her daughter in her arms reminded her of exactly how much was at stake. "We haven't seen anyone, Sergeant," Catherine said, proud that her voice sounded calm and believable. "The storm's been too fierce for anyone to be traveling." Behind her, James struggled to his feet, using the wall for support as he tried to make sense of what was happening in his home. Morrison's sharp eyes swept across every inch of the cabin like a hawk searching for prey, taking in the newly built fire, the damp spots on the floor where snow had melted, and the way Catherine held her baby protectively against her chest. His weathered face showed the kind of suspicion that came from years of chasing dangerous men across the frontier. And Catherine could practically see him putting together pieces of evidence she hadn't even realized she was leaving behind. "Fresh fire," Morrison observed, nodding toward the hearth where flames danced cheerfully against the stone. "Thought you folks might be frozen solid by now, being trapped in this storm for days." He moved closer to the fireplace, his boots leaving wet prints on the wooden floor. "Funny thing about fires, they take dry wood to get started, and I can see you're running mighty low on fuel." Catherine's mouth went dry as she realized her mistake. The fire that had seemed like such a blessing when Ayanna helped her build it now stood as evidence that someone else had been in their cabin. She clutched Emma tighter, feeling the baby's steady breathing against her chest, proof that Ayanna's medicine was working, but also a reminder of how much they still needed his continued help. "Found some dry pieces under the porch," Catherine said quickly, thinking fast. James managed to crawl out and get them before his fever got too bad. She glanced at her husband, hoping he would back up her story, but James still looked confused and unsteady as he leaned against the wall. One of the younger soldiers, barely more than a boy with peach fuzz on his cheeks, had been examining the area around their small window. "Sergeant," he called out, his voice tight with excitement. "Window's been opened recently. Still, some snow on the sill that ain't melted yet." Morrison's eyes snapped to Catherine's face, studying her expression with the intensity of a professional interrogator. "Now why would anyone open a window in the middle of a blizzard?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Unless maybe someone needed to get out in a hurry." Catherine felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold air still flowing through the open door. "Sometimes the cabin gets too warm when the fire's going good," she said, trying to sound natural. "Just opened it for a minute, to cool things down." The excuse sounded weak even to her own ears, and she could see Morrison wasn't buying it for a second. James finally found his voice, though it came out hoarse and shaky. "Catherine, what's this about? Why are soldiers here?" He took a step toward them, then swayed dangerously as his fever-weakened legs nearly gave out. Catherine moved quickly to steady him, grateful for the distraction his condition provided. "Your husband's been sick long?" Morrison asked, his sharp gaze taking in James's flushed face and unsteady movements. "Looks like he's been out of his head with fever for a while." "3 days now," Catherine replied truthfully, relieved to have something honest to say. "Started right when the storm hit. He's been mostly unconscious, until just now." She helped James sit down on their single wooden chair, noting how his hands shook as he gripped the armrests. The third soldier, an older man with graying temples, had been quietly examining the area around their door. "Sergeant," he said in a low voice, "these tracks outside, they're mighty confused. Storm's been blowing so hard it's tough to make out individual prints." Morrison nodded grimly, then turned his attention back to Catherine and Emma. "That's a mighty young baby you got there, ma'am," he said, his tone softening slightly. "Hope she's not taking sick in this cold weather." Catherine's heart clenched as she looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. The baby's color was definitely better than it had been before Ayana's medicine, but she was still pale and fragile-looking. "She's been fighting a cold," Catherine admitted carefully, "but she seems to be improving." "Mind if I take a look?" Morrison asked, stepping closer. "Had 6 children of my own back in Kansas. Know something about babies and winter sickness." Panic flashed through Catherine as she realized Morrison might notice signs of the unusual treatment Emma had received. The baby's lips still had traces of the green medicine, and her breathing pattern was different from what a typical cold would produce. If Morrison had really raised 6 children, he might spot something that would give away Ayana's presence. "She's sleeping so peacefully," Catherine said, backing away slightly. "I hate to disturb her when she's finally resting well." Emma stirred in her arms as if sensing the tension, making a small sound that was much stronger than the weak whimpers she had been producing all night. Morrison's experienced ear caught the difference immediately. "That baby sounds a lot healthier than you'd expect for one that's been sick in this cold," he observed, his suspicion clearly growing. "Almost like she's been getting some kind of special treatment." The young soldier near the window called out again, his voice full of discovery. "Sergeant, found something here you need to see." He held up a small object that caught the firelight, one of Ayana's bone hair ornaments, apparently dropped during his hasty escape through the window. Morrison's face went hard as granite as he examined the carved bone piece. "Comanche work," he said grimly. "Fresh dropped, too. Still got snow crystals on it that haven't melted." His cold blue eyes fixed on Catherine with the intensity of a man who had just solved a puzzle. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I suggest you think real careful before you answer." Catherine felt the world closing in around her as she stood in the middle of her small cabin, surrounded by armed men who now had proof that Ayana had been there. Emma's life hung in the balance. She still needed more medicine in 2 hours, and without Ayana's guidance, Catherine wasn't sure she could administer it properly. But James was watching her with growing confusion and concern, and she could see that any wrong move might put her entire family in danger. "The Comanche warrior we're tracking," Morrison continued, his voice deadly serious. "He's been in this cabin tonight, hasn't he? And you helped him get away." The silence that followed stretched like a taut wire, filled with the sound of wind outside and the crackling of the fire that had given away so much. Catherine looked down at Emma's peaceful face, then at James's fevered eyes, then back at Morrison's implacable stare. She realized that her next words would determine not just Ayana's fate, but the future of everyone she loved most in the world. The clay pot, hidden behind the flour barrel, seemed to burn in her mind like a beacon, holding the medicine that could save Emma's life if she could just get through the next few minutes without destroying everything. But Morrison was clearly a man who knew when he was being lied to, and Catherine wasn't sure she had any more lies left in her that he would believe. "He saved my baby's life," Catherine said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them, her voice ringing with fierce conviction that surprised even herself. The truth hung in the air like smoke from their fire, and she watched Morrison's face change from suspicion to shock to something that might have been understanding. James struggled to his feet again, gripping the chair for support as he stared at his wife in confusion. "Catherine, what are you talking about? Who saved Emma?" His fever-clouded mind was clearly trying to piece together events he had missed during his unconscious hours, and Catherine could see the moment when fear began to replace confusion in his eyes. Morrison held up a hand to silence his men, who had started muttering among themselves at Catherine's unexpected confession. "Ma'am, are you telling me you willingly let a Comanche warrior into your home with your sick baby and fevered husband?" His tone held disbelief mixed with something that might have been grudging respect for her honesty. "Emma was dying," Catherine said simply, looking down at her daughter's peaceful face. "She had the cold sickness, and her breathing was getting weaker every hour. I had been holding her all night, singing to her, but I could feel her slipping away." Her voice broke slightly as she remembered those terrible hours of helplessness. "When he came to the door and said he could help, what choice did I have?" The young soldier near the window shifted nervously, his rifle still ready but his expression uncertain. "Sergeant, if the baby was really dying," he began, then trailed off as Morrison shot him a sharp look that clearly said to keep his opinions to himself. James managed to take a few shaky steps toward Catherine, his face pale with more than just fever. "You let a Comanche into our home while I was unconscious?" he asked, his voice rising with panic. "Catherine, do you have any idea how dangerous that was? He could have killed you both and burned down the cabin." "But he didn't," Catherine replied firmly, meeting her husband's frightened gaze. "He mixed medicine from plants, gave it to Emma drop by drop, and showed me how to keep her warm. Look at her, James. Really look. She's breathing better than she has in days." Morrison stepped closer to examine Emma more carefully, his experienced eyes taking in the baby's improved color and steadier breathing. "I'll grant you the child looks healthier than most babies would after being sick in this cold," he admitted grudgingly. "But that doesn't change the fact that you harbored a fugitive who killed soldiers just 2 weeks ago." "Killed soldiers who were attacking women and children," Catherine shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. "He told me what really happened at that camp. Your men weren't fighting warriors. They were slaughtering innocent people." The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop several degrees as Morrison's face went hard as stone. "You're mighty quick to believe the word of a savage over the sworn testimony of United States soldiers," he said coldly. "That Comanche is wanted for the murder of 3 good men who died doing their duty." "Their duty?" Catherine's voice rose with indignation she didn't know she possessed. "What duty requires grown men to kill babies and grandmothers?" She clutched Emma closer, thinking of Ayana's lost daughter and the pain she had heard in his voice when he spoke of her. The older soldier near the door cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sergeant, maybe we should focus on tracking the fugitive instead of debating politics with civilians," he suggested diplomatically. "Storm's letting up some, and if we don't move soon, we'll lose his trail completely." Morrison glanced toward the window, where indeed the howling wind had quieted to a steady whisper, and the snow appeared to be falling less heavily. "You're right, Corporal Davis," he said, though his eyes remained fixed on Catherine. "But first I want to know exactly which direction that Comanche went when he left here." Catherine felt her heart sink as she realized Morrison had no intention of simply walking away. He was going to continue hunting Ayanna, and now he had a fresh starting point for his search. "I don't know," she said truthfully. "I was focused on Emma. I didn't see which way he went." "The tracks from the window head toward the tree line," the young soldier reported. "But with this snow, they'll be covered up within an hour." James had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, and now he turned to stare at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "Catherine, what have you done?" he whispered. "Do you realize you've made us accomplices to murder? If word of this gets out, we could be arrested, tried, maybe even hanged." "No one's going to hang anybody," Morrison said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure about that. "But there will be consequences for aiding a fugitive, especially one who's killed soldiers." He looked around the cabin again, taking inventory of their modest possessions. "Question is, were you folks just being neighborly to a stranger in a storm? Or were you actively helping a known criminal escape justice?" Catherine understood that Morrison was offering her a way out, a chance to claim ignorance and avoid the worst consequences of her actions. All she had to do was say she hadn't known who Ayanna really was, that she had been deceived by a clever savage who took advantage of her maternal desperation. But looking down at Emma's peaceful face, feeling the steady rhythm of breathing that had been so frighteningly weak just hours before, Catherine found she couldn't bring herself to betray the man who had saved her daughter's life. Ayanna had risked everything to help a white woman's baby, showing more compassion and courage than she had ever imagined possible from someone she had been taught to fear. "I knew exactly who he was," Catherine said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "And I would make the same choice again if my daughter's life depended on it." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire and Emma's soft breathing. Morrison stared at Catherine with something that might have been admiration mixed with frustration, while James looked like he might faint from shock at his wife's admission. "Well then," Morrison said finally, his voice carefully neutral, "I guess we have ourselves a situation that's going to require some careful thinking." He gestured to his men. "Davis, Jenkins, check the perimeter and see if you can pick up any usable tracks. I need a few minutes to decide how we're going to handle this." As the two soldiers filed out into the cold night, Morrison remained behind, studying Catherine and James with the calculating gaze of a man weighing difficult options. "Ma'am," he said eventually, "I hope you understand that your honesty, while admirable, has put us all in a very complicated position." Catherine nodded, knowing that her decision to tell the truth had changed everything. But as she looked down at Emma's healthy pink cheeks and listened to her strong, steady breathing, she felt no regret. Whatever consequences lay ahead, her daughter was alive, and that was worth any price she might have to pay. Outside the cabin, Corporal Davis crouched beside the window where Ayanna had made his escape, studying the ground with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years tracking both animals and men across the Montana wilderness. The snow was still falling, but more gently now, and the wind had died down enough that he could make out faint impressions in the white powder that covered everything. "Jenkins, come look at this," Davis called to his younger companion, who was searching the area near their horses. "These tracks are strange, almost like whoever made them knew exactly how to step to leave the least amount of sign." Jenkins trudged through the snow to join the older soldier, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "What do you mean, Corporal?" Davis pointed to a series of barely visible depressions leading away from the cabin toward the dark tree line. "See how he's stepping on rocks and fallen logs when he can? Avoiding soft snow that would hold a deep print. This isn't just someone running scared. This is someone who knows how to disappear." Inside the cabin, Morrison had settled into the chair James had vacated, his weathered hands clasped in front of him as he studied the small family before him. Emma had begun to stir in Catherine's arms, making soft sounds that spoke of returning health rather than the desperate weakness she had shown earlier. 23 years I've been chasing outlaws and hostiles across this territory," Morrison said quietly, his voice lacking the harsh authority it had carried before. "Seen all kinds of people do all kinds of things when they're desperate or scared or angry." He paused, watching Emma's tiny fist wave in the air. "But I've never seen a white woman risk everything to protect a Comanche warrior." James had managed to sit down on the edge of their bed, though he still looked unsteady and confused. "Sergeant, my wife isn't thinking clearly," he said desperately. "She's been under terrible strain with a baby being sick and me being unconscious. Surely you can understand that people don't make good decisions when they're terrified." Morrison's gaze shifted to James, and Catherine could see the sergeant taking the measure of her husband, noting the way James seemed more concerned with avoiding consequences than understanding what had actually happened. "Your wife seems plenty clear, thinking to me," Morrison replied. "Takes a lot of courage to look a squad of armed soldiers in the eye and admit to helping their target escape." Catherine felt a surge of gratitude toward Morrison for defending her judgment, even though she knew he was still duty-bound to pursue Ayanna. "Sergeant," she said carefully, "what happens now? To us, I mean." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with competing loyalties and responsibilities. "That depends on a few things," he said finally, "like whether that Comanche warrior poses a continuing threat to settlers in this area, and whether helping him escape makes you folks accessories to future crimes." "He's not a threat to innocent people," Catherine said with absolute conviction. "Everything about the way he acted tonight showed me that. He could have taken anything he wanted from our cabin, could have hurt us if he chose to. Instead, he spent hours saving my baby's life and asked for nothing in return." Davis appeared at the open door, stamping snow from his boots. "Sergeant, we've got a problem," he announced, his expression grim. "Those tracks head straight into the worst part of the forest, where the trees are so thick a man could hide for weeks without being found. And with more snow coming, we'll lose the trail completely within the hour." Morrison stood up, his decision-making process clearly weighing practical concerns against his duty to capture a fugitive. "How many men would it take to search that forest properly?" he asked. "At least a dozen working in teams," Davis replied. "And even then, if he knows the country well, he could stay ahead of us indefinitely." The corporal paused, glancing at Catherine before continuing. "There's something else, Sergeant. Some of the local tribal leaders have been asking for meetings lately, wanting to negotiate safe passage agreements. If we're seen chasing one of their healers through the mountains." Morrison's jaw tightened as he considered the political implications. Catherine could see him weighing his orders against the larger picture of keeping peace in the territory. A prolonged manhunt for a Comanche healer might inflame tensions that had been carefully managed for months. Emma began to fuss slightly, and Catherine automatically began rocking her gently while humming the same lullaby she had sung through the long, desperate hours before Ayanna's arrival. The contrast between her daughter's current healthy complaints and the frightening weakness of earlier was stark, and Catherine sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the medicine that had made the difference. "Ma'am," Morrison said suddenly, "that medicine he gave your baby, do you still have some of it?" Catherine's heart skipped a beat as she remembered the clay pot hidden behind the flour barrel. "Why do you ask?" "Because if that Comanche really has healing skills that could save other children's lives, maybe there's more to consider here than just catching a fugitive," Morrison replied slowly. "My own grandson back in Kansas has been fighting lung sickness all winter. Doctors say they've done all they can." The admission hung in the air between them, revealing a personal stake in the situation that Catherine hadn't expected. She could see Morrison, the grandfather, warring with Morrison, the soldier, duty competing with hope for his family's well-being. "He said I should give Emma more medicine in 2 hours," Catherine admitted quietly. "Same amount, same way. He left enough for several more doses." Morrison nodded thoughtfully, then turned to address his men. "Davis, Jenkins, I want you to head back to the fort and report that we lost the trail in the storm. Tell Captain Mitchell that continuing the search would require more men and resources than the situation warrants." "Sir," Jenkins looked confused, "what about our orders to bring back the fugitive?" "Our orders were to pursue and apprehend if possible," Morrison replied firmly. "Sometimes if possible turns out to be not possible. Storms washed out the trail, and we don't have the manpower for an extended search through hostile territory." Catherine felt a rush of relief so powerful it made her knees weak. Morrison was choosing to let Ayanna disappear into the wilderness, prioritizing practical concerns over strict adherence to orders. It was the kind of decision that took both wisdom and courage, especially for a career soldier. "What about us?" James asked nervously. "Are we going to be charged with helping him?" Morrison looked at James for a long moment, then at Catherine holding Emma, then back at James. "Far as I can tell, you folks were trapped in a blizzard with a sick baby and took help from whoever offered it," he said slowly. "No law against accepting medical assistance from a stranger, even if that stranger turns out to be someone we were looking for." Catherine understood that Morrison was giving them an official version of events that would protect them from legal consequences, while allowing him to file a report that satisfied his superiors. It was a generous interpretation of the situation, and she felt grateful for his willingness to see the humanity in their impossible circumstances. As Morrison and his men prepared to leave, the sergeant paused at the door to look back at Emma one more time. "That baby of yours is lucky to have a mother willing to fight for her," he said quietly. "Don't ever let anyone tell you that protecting your child makes you anything less than a hero." The words hit Catherine like a warm embrace, validating her choice in a way she hadn't realized she needed. As the soldiers mounted their horses and rode away into the snowy night, Catherine felt the weight of the last few hours settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Emma's soft breathing was the only sound in the suddenly quiet cabin, a peaceful rhythm that spoke of health and hope and the possibility of seeing morning together as a family. James collapsed back onto the bed the moment the soldier's hoofbeats faded into the distance, his face draining of what little color the fever had left him. "Catherine, do you understand what you've done to us?" he whispered, his voice shaking with more than just physical weakness. "You've destroyed our reputation, our standing in the community. When word gets out that we harbored a Comanche warrior..." Catherine carefully retrieved the clay pot from behind the flour barrel, checking its contents in the firelight. The green medicine still held its sharp, earthy scent, and there was enough left for at least 3 more doses. "Word won't get out," she said quietly, focusing on Emma's needs rather than James's fears. Morrison made it clear, they're going to report this as a lost trail, nothing more. "You can't trust soldiers to keep their mouths shut," James insisted, struggling to sit up despite his obvious exhaustion. "Stories like this spread through the territory like wildfire. By spring, everyone from here to Helena will know that James and Catherine Hayes sheltered a killer in their home." His voice cracked with the weight of his terror. "We'll be outcasts, Catherine. No one will trade with us, do business with us, maybe even talk to us." Emma stirred in Catherine's arms, making a soft sound that was stronger and healthier than any noise she had made in days. The baby's eyes fluttered open for just a moment, revealing clear blue irises instead of the glassy, unfocused look that had frightened Catherine so badly earlier. It was a small sign, but it filled Catherine with hope that Ayanna's medicine was truly working. "Look at her, James," Catherine said, carrying Emma closer to where her husband sat, hunched over on the bed. "Really look at our daughter. 2 hours ago she was dying, and now she's breathing normally. Her color is coming back. She's going to live because of what that man did for us." James glanced at Emma briefly, but his attention immediately returned to his own worries. "What good is saving her life if we can't provide for her?" he demanded. "If we become pariahs in this territory, how will we make a living? How will we buy supplies, sell our crops, find help when we need it?" Catherine felt a flash of anger at her husband's priorities, though she tried to push it down. James was still weak from fever and frightened by circumstances he hadn't been conscious to witness or understand. But his immediate focus on social consequences, rather than gratitude for Emma's life, revealed something about his character that Catherine found deeply troubling. "We'll manage," Catherine said firmly, settling into their single wooden chair with Emma cradled against her chest. "People have short memories, especially when winter makes everyone focus on their own survival. By the time trading season starts again, there will be new gossip to occupy their attention." James shook his head violently, then winced as the motion made his fever-addled head spin. "You don't understand how things work out here, Catherine. Reputation is everything. A man's word, his reliability, his loyalty to his own kind. That's what determines whether he prospers or starves." He looked at her with something approaching accusation. "You've thrown all of that away for a stranger who probably would have scalped us both if circumstances had been different." The unfairness of James's words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She had made an impossible choice under unthinkable pressure, choosing her daughter's life over abstract social concerns. And now her husband was treating her like she had committed some unforgivable betrayal. The loneliness of the decision, making it entirely on her own while James lay unconscious, suddenly felt overwhelming. "He wouldn't have hurt us," Catherine said quietly, though she could hear the doubt creeping into her own voice. Had she been naive to trust Ayanna so completely? Had maternal desperation clouded her judgment about the risks she was taking with her family's safety? "How can you possibly know that?" James pressed, sensing her uncertainty. "You spent a few hours with a man you'd never met before, a man from a tribe known for raiding settlements and killing families, and you think you understand his character? Catherine, that's the kind of thinking that gets entire families murdered in their beds." Emma made another soft sound, and Catherine automatically began rocking her gently while humming under her breath. The familiar melody helped calm her own nerves as much as it soothed the baby. She thought about Ayanna's hands, so large and weathered, yet infinitely gentle as they handled Emma's tiny body. She remembered the pain in his voice when he spoke of his lost daughter, the careful way he had prepared the medicine, the genuine concern in his eyes as he monitored Emma's breathing. "He lost his own baby daughter to the same sickness," Catherine said, not looking at James as she spoke. "She was the same age as Emma when she died. He couldn't save her, but he saved ours. That's not the action of a man who kills innocent people for pleasure." James was quiet for a moment, perhaps processing this information for the first time. "Even if that's true," he said finally, "it doesn't change the fact that he's wanted for killing soldiers. Whatever his reasons, whatever happened at that camp, he's still a fugitive from justice." "Justice?" Catherine's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. What justice was there in attacking a peaceful camp full of women and children? What justice would there be in letting Emma die when help was available? She looked directly at her husband, challenging him to meet her gaze. "Sometimes what's legal and what's right are two different things, James." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind had died down to a gentle whisper, and the snow was falling more softly now, as if the storm that had brought so much chaos and change was finally exhausting itself. Catherine could hear their horse moving restlessly in the small barn, probably hungry and thirsty after being neglected during the worst of the weather. "I need to check on the animals," James said suddenly, though he made no move to get up from the bed. "Haven't been able to tend them properly since I got sick." Catherine realized this was James's way of changing the subject, avoiding the deeper questions about right and wrong that made him uncomfortable. "You're still too weak," she said. "I'll go out in a little while, after I give Emma her next dose of medicine." The mention of the medicine brought James's attention back to the clay pot sitting on their small table. "You're really going to give her more of that, whatever it is?" he asked, his voice carrying both worry and disgust. "Catherine, we have no idea what's in that mixture. It could be poison or some kind of drug that makes her seem better while actually harming her." Catherine felt her patience finally snap. "James, stop it," she said sharply. "Emma was dying. Dying, do you understand? I could feel her slipping away breath by breath. That medicine saved her life, and I'm going to continue giving it to her exactly as Ayanna instructed until she's fully recovered." James flinched at her tone, clearly taken aback by the steel in her voice. Catherine had never spoken to him so firmly before, but the events of the night had changed something fundamental in her understanding of herself and her priorities. She had faced an impossible choice and made it, accepting full responsibility for the consequences. That kind of decision left its mark on a person's soul. "I just want what's best for our family," James said weakly, his earlier anger fading into something that looked almost like fear. "I want us to be safe, to fit in, to have a good life here in Montana." "So do I," Catherine replied, her voice softening slightly. "But sometimes protecting what matters most requires taking risks that seem dangerous to everyone else." She looked down at Emma's peaceful face, noting how much healthier the baby looked compared to just a few hours earlier. "Our daughter is alive because I was willing to trust a stranger who offered help when I had nowhere else to turn." The weight of the night's events settled between them like a tangible presence, changing the very air in their small cabin. Catherine understood that her relationship with James had been altered by her decision to help Ayanna, perhaps permanently. The question now was whether they could find a way to move forward together, or whether the fundamental differences in their values would drive a wedge between them that could never be fully repaired. Emma's steady breathing filled the silence, a reminder of what had been gained through courage and what might be lost through fear. Dawn crept across the Montana mountains like a shy animal emerging from hiding, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold that seemed impossible after the terrible darkness of the storm. Catherine stood at their window, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms, watching the sun transform their world from a place of terror into something beautiful and hopeful. The medicine had worked exactly as Ayanna promised. Catherine had given Emma the second dose 2 hours after the soldiers left, watching carefully as the baby swallowed the green liquid without protest. Emma's breathing had continued to strengthen throughout the night, her color improving steadily until she looked like a normal, healthy infant instead of the frighteningly pale creature Catherine had held during those desperate hours. James had finally fallen into genuine sleep rather than fever-induced unconsciousness, his temperature breaking just before dawn in a way that left him weak but clear-headed. He lay now, under their heavy quilt, breathing normally for the first time in days, though Catherine could see the worry lines still etched deep around his eyes, even in sleep. A soft knock at their door made Catherine's heart skip, though this time the sound carried none of the urgency or authority of the soldiers' arrival. This was a gentle, respectful tap that suggested a neighbor or perhaps a traveler seeking help. Catherine checked to make sure James was still sleeping peacefully, then carefully opened the door with Emma cradled in one arm. A young woman stood on their doorstep, probably no more than 20, with wind-burned cheeks and intelligent brown eyes that immediately focused on Emma with obvious relief. She wore a simple wool dress under a thick traveling cloak, and her dark hair was braided in a practical style that suggested someone accustomed to frontier life. "Mrs. Hayes?" the woman asked in a soft voice with a slight accent Catherine couldn't immediately place. "My name is Maria Santos. I live about 5 miles north of here, near the river crossing. I've come about the medicine man who helped your baby." Catherine's blood turned cold as she realized that word of Ayanna's presence had somehow spread despite Morrison's promise to keep the incident quiet. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said carefully, though she could hear the lie in her own voice. Maria smiled gently, her expression holding none of the judgment or fear Catherine had expected. "Please, Mrs. Hayes, I'm not here to cause trouble. My little brother Miguel is sick with the same cold sickness your baby had. I saw the smoke from your chimney and hoped." She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "He's only 3 years old, and he's been getting worse every day." Catherine felt her heart clench with sympathy as she recognized the same desperate love in Maria's voice that she had felt all through the long night. "How did you know about?" Catherine began, then stopped, unsure how much she should admit. "My husband Carlos was hunting in the hills yesterday when the storm hit," Maria explained. "He took shelter in a cave and saw a man moving through the trees just before dawn, someone who moved like he belonged to the wilderness itself. Carlos said the man looked like he might be Comanche, carrying a medicine bag." Catherine processed this information, realizing that Ayanna's escape route had taken him past other settlements, where desperate families might be dealing with their own medical emergencies. The thought that there might be other children suffering from the same cold sickness that had nearly killed Emma made her stomach twist with sympathy. "Even if what you're saying is true," Catherine said slowly, "the man you're talking about is gone. He left here hours ago, and I have no idea where he went." Maria's face fell, but then she noticed how healthy Emma looked in Catherine's arms. "Your baby," she said wonderingly. "She looks so much better than when I saw her at the trading post last week. The medicine worked, didn't it?" Catherine found herself nodding before she could stop herself. Emma did indeed look remarkably improved, her skin pink and warm, her breathing deep and regular. The transformation was so dramatic that anyone who had seen Emma's condition before would immediately notice the difference. "Do you still have some of the medicine?" Maria asked urgently. "Please, Mrs. Hayes. Miguel is dying. Our doctor did everything he could, but he said there's nothing more to try. If there's even a chance that this could help." Catherine thought about the clay pot sitting on their table, still containing enough medicine for at least 2 more doses. Ayana had said to give Emma another dose in a few hours, but the baby was already breathing so much better that Catherine wondered if she might not need the full treatment. Could she spare some medicine for another dying child? "I don't know how to prepare it properly," Catherine said hesitantly. "The man who made it had special knowledge, specific instructions. I'd be afraid of giving the wrong amount or doing something that might hurt your brother." "Please," Maria begged, tears running down her cheeks. "At least let me try. Miguel is going to die anyway if nothing changes. What harm could it do to attempt something that might save him?" Catherine felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders again, though this time the choice felt different. She wasn't risking her own family's safety, but she also wasn't qualified to make medical decisions for someone else's child. What if she gave Maria the wrong instructions? What if the medicine that had worked for Emma proved harmful to a different child? Emma stirred in her arms, making a soft, contented sound that spoke of returning health and strength. The contrast between her daughter's improving condition and the desperate situation Maria described was almost unbearable. How could Catherine enjoy Emma's recovery while another mother watched her child slip away from the same illness? "Let me think for a moment," Catherine said, stepping back from the door. "Come inside where it's warm and tell me exactly what symptoms your brother is showing." Maria followed Catherine into the cabin, her eyes immediately going to the fire and the signs of recent activity, the clay pot on the table, the medicinal smell that still lingered in the air, the general atmosphere of a place where healing had taken place. Catherine could see recognition dawning in the young woman's eyes as she pieced together what had happened. "He's barely breathing," Maria said, describing Miguel's condition. "His lips are blue, his skin is cold, and he won't take milk or water. He just lies there making tiny sounds, getting weaker every hour." The description matched Emma's symptoms exactly, confirming Catherine's suspicion that both children were suffering from the same dangerous illness. Catherine looked down at the remaining medicine, then at Maria's desperate face, then at Emma's healthy pink cheeks. The decision felt both impossible and inevitable, weighted with the responsibility of potentially saving or endangering a child's life. But as she thought about Ayana's willingness to risk everything to help a stranger's baby, Catherine began to understand what choice she had to make. The morning light streaming through their window seemed to illuminate not just their cabin, but the path forward through another moment that would test her courage and define her character. Emma's steady breathing provided a counterpoint to the silence, as Catherine prepared to make another decision that could change everything. Catherine's hands trembled as she carefully measured out half of the remaining medicine into a small wooden cup, knowing that this decision could mean the difference between life and death for Maria's little brother. The green liquid caught the morning light streaming through their window, looking both miraculous and terrifying as she prepared to share Ayana's healing gift with another desperate family. "You must follow the instructions exactly," Catherine said urgently, showing Maria how to hold the cup at the proper angle. 3 drops at a time, directly onto his tongue, waiting several minutes between each dose. Too much at once could go into his lungs instead of his stomach, and that might hurt him badly. Maria nodded eagerly, her eyes bright with hope as she listened to every word Catherine spoke. "How often should I give it to him? How will I know if it's working?" The young woman's accent became more pronounced as her excitement grew, revealing Spanish origins that explained her olive skin and dark features. "Ayana said to give another dose every 2 hours until breathing improves," Catherine replied, then caught herself using the healer's name. Maria's eyebrows rose with interest, but she didn't comment on the slip. Watch for his color to get better, for his breathing to become deeper and more regular. "But, Maria," Catherine gripped the other woman's arm gently, "if he gets worse instead of better, stop giving the medicine immediately and find a doctor." James stirred on the bed behind them, his fever-broken sleep growing lighter as the voices in the cabin penetrated his consciousness. Catherine glanced back at her husband nervously, knowing he would strongly disapprove of her decision to share their precious remaining medicine with strangers. But Emma was clearly recovering well, and the thought of another child dying when help was available felt unbearable. "I should go quickly," Maria said, carefully tucking the cup into her cloak. "Carlos is with Miguel now, but he's so frightened. Men don't know how to handle sick babies the way mothers do." She paused at the door, looking back at Catherine with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I know you're taking a big risk." Catherine understood that Maria wasn't just talking about the medicine. By sharing Ayana's healing knowledge, Catherine was extending the circle of people who knew about the Comanche warrior's presence, multiplying the chances that word might spread beyond those who could be trusted to keep silent. But as she looked at Emma's healthy face, Catherine felt certain she was making the right choice. "Bring Miguel back here. If the medicine doesn't work," Catherine said impulsively. If the healer returns, maybe he could help directly." Even as she spoke the words, Catherine realized how unlikely such a return would be. Ayana was probably miles away by now, moving deeper into the wilderness to avoid the soldiers who were hunting him. After Maria left, Catherine sat by the fire holding Emma, listening to her daughter's strong, steady breathing while worrying about the choice she had just made. The remaining medicine in the clay pot would provide perhaps one more dose for Emma, but what if her daughter needed continued treatment? What if sharing the medicine with Maria proved to be a terrible mistake that endangered Emma's recovery? James finally woke fully as the morning sun climbed higher, his eyes clearer than they had been in days, but immediately suspicious as he noticed the medicinal smell in the air and Catherine's obvious tension. "What's wrong?" he asked, struggling to sit up. "You look like something's troubling you." Catherine considered lying to avoid another argument, but the events of the night had changed her relationship with deception. "A woman came asking for help," she said simply. "Her little brother has the same sickness Emma had. I gave her some of the medicine." James's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally something approaching horror. "Catherine, tell me you didn't just give away our daughter's medicine to complete strangers," he said, his voice rising despite his physical weakness. "Emma is getting better," Catherine replied firmly, gesturing to their daughter's obviously improved condition. "She doesn't need all of the remaining medicine, and that little boy was dying. How could I keep it when another mother was begging for help?" "Because that medicine was meant for our child," James exploded, then immediately winced as the outburst made his head pound. "Catherine, what if Emma gets worse again? What if she needs more treatment? You've just condemned our daughter to possible death for the sake of people we barely know." Catherine felt anger rising in her chest at James's selfishness, though she tried to keep her voice calm for Emma's sake. "Look at her, James. Really, look. She's breathing normally, her color is good, she's acting like a healthy baby. The medicine worked, and she's going to be fine." "You don't know that," James insisted, his fear making him cruel. "You're not a doctor, Catherine. You're a farmer's wife who's making medical decisions based on hope and superstition. That Comanche could have given you anything: poison, drugs that make symptoms temporarily better before making them worse. Some kind of witchcraft that seems like healing, but isn't." His words hit Catherine like physical blows, attacking not just her judgment but her fundamental understanding of what had happened during the night. Had she been naive to trust Ayana so completely? Was James right that desperation had clouded her ability to think clearly about the risks she was taking? But even as doubt crept into her mind, Catherine looked down at Emma's peaceful face and felt certainty return. Whatever Ayana had given them wasn't poison or false medicine. It was genuine healing that had pulled her daughter back from the edge of death. The evidence was sleeping contentedly in her arms, breathing easily for the first time in days. "I know what I saw," Catherine said quietly. "I watched Emma dying, breath by breath, and I watched that medicine bring her back to life. Whatever else you might say about Ayana, he saved our daughter when nobody else could or would." James struggled to his feet, swaying slightly but determined to make his point through physical presence as well as words. And now you've put that salvation at risk by giving away medicine we might still need, he said, his voice thick with frustration. Catherine, I understand that you feel grateful, but gratitude doesn't give you the right to gamble with Emma's life. The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. Catherine realized that this argument went deeper than disagreement about medicine. This reflected fundamental differences in how she and James viewed their responsibilities to other people, their obligations to their community, and their understanding of what it meant to be truly safe in an uncertain world. Emma stirred in Catherine's arms, opening her eyes for a moment and looking directly at her mother with the clear, focused gaze of a healthy infant. The sight filled Catherine with such relief and joy that she felt tears starting to form. Whatever mistakes she might have made, whatever risks she had taken, Emma was alive and recovering beautifully. She's going to be fine, Catherine said with absolute conviction. And if that medicine helps save another child's life, then sharing it was the right thing to do. She met James's frustrated gaze directly, no longer afraid of his disapproval. Sometimes being a good person requires taking risks that seem foolish to everyone else. The morning light continued to brighten their small cabin, illuminating the space where so much had changed in just one night. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving behind a world covered in fresh snow that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. It was the kind of beautiful winter morning that made survival feel like a victory, and hope seem like a reasonable response to whatever challenges lay ahead. But inside the cabin, the real storm was just beginning, as Catherine and James faced the reality that their marriage had been fundamentally altered by the choices made during those desperate hours when death had come knocking at their door. 3 days later, Catherine was hanging wash on the line behind their cabin when she saw a familiar figure approaching through the trees, moving with the same fluid grace that had first marked Ayanna as someone who belonged to the wilderness. Her heart leaped with joy and relief as she recognized the Comanche healer, though she immediately began scanning the surrounding forest for any sign that he might be followed. Ayanna emerged from the tree line, carrying a leather satchel and what appeared to be freshly hunted game, 2 rabbits that would provide much-needed protein for families struggling through the harsh winter. His dark eyes immediately sought out Catherine's face, and she could see the question there before he spoke. "Little warrior lives?" he asked simply, his careful English carrying the same gentle concern she remembered from that desperate night. Catherine's face broke into a smile so bright it seemed to light up the entire clearing around their cabin. "She's wonderful," Catherine replied, her voice thick with gratitude and emotion. "Healthy, strong, eating well. The medicine worked exactly as you said it would." She gestured toward the cabin, where Emma's contented babbling could be heard through the open door. "Would you like to see her?" Ayanna's weathered face softened with something that might have been relief mixed with joy. "I would be honored," he said formally, then paused as his expression grew more serious. "But first, I must know, soldiers came here after I left. Did they cause trouble for your family?" Catherine shook her head quickly, eager to reassure him. "The sergeant let us tell our own version of what happened. He reported that they lost your trail in the storm and couldn't continue the search. As far as anyone official knows, you were never here." "Good," Ayanna nodded approvingly. "Morrison is wise man for soldier. He understands that some things matter more than following orders exactly." The healer's eyes studied Catherine's face carefully. "But your husband, he was not happy about helping stranger, I think." Catherine's expression grew more complicated as she considered how to answer. James had been cold and distant ever since learning about her decision to share the medicine with Maria, speaking to her only when necessary and treating her choices as fundamental betrayals of their family's welfare. The joy of Emma's recovery had been overshadowed by the growing tension in their marriage. "James is adjusting to what happened," Catherine said diplomatically. "He's grateful that Emma survived, but he worries about the consequences of our actions." She didn't mention the constant arguments, the accusations of recklessness, or the way James had begun questioning every decision she made regarding their household and their daughter. Ayanna studied her face with the perceptive gaze of someone accustomed to reading people's unspoken emotions. "Fear makes people angry sometimes," he observed quietly. Your man is afraid of what helping me might cost your family. This is not wrong feeling, but it can poison good things if held too long." Before Catherine could respond, Emma's delighted laughter rang out from inside the cabin, followed by James's voice talking to her in the gentle tone he reserved for their daughter. The sound made Catherine's heart ache with longing for the harmony they had shared before the storm changed everything between them. "There is something else," Ayanna said, reaching into a satchel to pull out a small leather pouch decorated with the same intricate beadwork Catherine had noticed on his medicine bag. "I come to bring gift for little warrior and to check on other sick child in area." Catherine's eyes widened as she realized what he meant. "You know about Miguel, Maria's little brother?" When Ayanna nodded, Catherine felt a surge of amazement at how quickly news traveled through the wilderness networks she was only beginning to understand. "Boy's father found me 2 days ago, following tracks through mountains," Ayanna explained. "He brought message from his wife. Medicine worked. Child is breathing better. But family wants to thank healer who saved both babies." The Comanche warrior's expression grew almost shy as he continued. "Long time since anyone wanted to thank me for anything except leaving quickly." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes as she imagined Carlos Santos tracking Ayanna through dangerous mountain terrain, driven by gratitude and the need to express his family's appreciation. The image of these different cultures, connecting through shared concern for children's welfare, filled her with hope for possibilities she had never considered before. "They want to meet you?" Catherine asked, though she could already see potential complications arising from such a meeting. The Santos family might be grateful, but other settlers in the area might react very differently to learning that a Comanche warrior was moving freely through their territory. "Carlos speaks some of my language from trading days," Ayanna replied. "He says his people come from Mexico, understand what it means to be strangers in land that belongs to others." The healer paused, considering his words carefully. "He offers safe place to stay during cold months. If I help tend sick children in settlement. His wife is good with healing plants, wants to learn more." Catherine felt her heart soar at this unexpected development. The idea that Ayanna might find a place where his skills were welcomed rather than feared seemed almost too good to be true. But as she thought about the implications, she also felt worry creeping in about how other settlers might react to such an arrangement. "That sounds wonderful," Catherine said cautiously. "But are you sure it's safe? If word spreads that you're staying in the area?" "Always risk," Ayanna acknowledged with a slight shrug. "But winter is hard time for children. Much sickness, much death that could be prevented with right medicine, right knowledge." His dark eyes met Catherine's directly. "Your courage in helping stranger teaches me that some white people can see past skin color to human heart underneath. Maybe others can learn same lesson." Emma's voice grew louder from inside the cabin, and Catherine could hear James moving around, probably preparing to bring their daughter outside to enjoy the warm afternoon sunshine. The thought of James encountering Ayanna unexpectedly made Catherine's stomach clench with anxiety about the confrontation that would surely follow. "My husband will be coming out soon," Catherine said quickly. "He's still very uncomfortable with everything that happened. Maybe it would be better if—" "I understand," Ayanna said gently, already beginning to back toward the tree line. "But first, give this to little warrior." He pressed the beaded pouch into Catherine's hands. "Medicine herbs for any future sickness. Also, small toy my grandmother made for daughter I lost. Better that living child should have it than dead man should carry it forever." Catherine felt the weight of the gift in her hands, not just the physical object, but the emotional significance of Ayanna entrusting Emma with something that had belonged to his lost daughter. The gesture spoke of healing on a level deeper than medicine, of a man learning to let love flow toward new life, rather than being trapped forever in grief for what was lost. "Thank you," Catherine whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For saving Emma. For trusting us. For showing me what real courage looks like." Ayanna smiled, and for a moment his weathered face looked almost young. "You show me same thing," he replied. "Mother willing to risk everything for child's life. Woman willing to see person instead of enemy. This takes strongest kind of brave heart. As footsteps approached the cabin door, Ayanna melted back into the forest with the same silent grace that had brought him to their door 3 nights earlier. Catherine stood holding his gifts, watching the trees where he had disappeared, feeling as though she had just witnessed something magical and transformative slip away into the wilderness. The door opened behind her, and James emerged carrying Emma, his face immediately darkening as he took in Catherine's emotional expression and the beaded pouch in her hands.